What if I told you a 35% tariff broke up one of North America's most reliable relationships, and no one even said goodbye? No headlines, no press conference, just 140,000 tons of Canadian potatoes, gone. Prices are up, portions are smaller, and America's fries, soggy, sad, and $5.25 a plate. But this isn't just about fries. This is about how one bad policy pushed Canada to walk away, not with anger, but with a quiet, strategic exit. And now, the US might never get those fries, all that trust, back. In April 2025, Washington slapped a 35% tariff on Canadian potatoes. No warning, no negotiation. Overnight, a $22 bag of potatoes cost $30. Your $3.50 plate of fries, now $5.25. And Canada, they didn't retaliate, they didn't protest, they just stopped shipping. Warehouses went dark, farmers cut back, the fries didn't disappear in a trade war, they just ghosted. Before this, Canada sent over 350,000 metric tons of potatoes to the US every year. This was ritual, not just trade. Minnesota diners ran on pay potatoes the way Congress runs on lobbyist coffee. It was the most stable food pipeline in North America, until someone in a DC office decided to tax potatoes like luxury handbags. And the result? A 41% collapse in Canadian potato exports to the United States by the second quarter of 2025, the worst drop since the 1980s. Restaurants across America, once loyal to Prince Edward Island's legendary potatoes, scrambled to find replacements. They turned to cheaper domestic alternatives. But, spoiler alert, they don't fry the same. Diners noticed. The texture was wrong, the crispness was gone, and that unmistakable, faintly chemical aftertaste. Unwelcome. In Eau Claire, Wisconsin, one longtime customer summed it up with brutal honesty. I paid $5 for fries that tasted like wet cardboard. I used to come here twice a week. Now I bring lunch. Across the Midwest, this scene repeated like clockwork. Small diners began shrinking portions. Margins got tighter, some kitchens went dark, but north of the border, Canada took a different path. They didn't argue, they pivoted. While Washington played tough with tariffs, Ottawa flew to Asia, not to argue, but to trade. In spring 2025, Canada signed a $1.6 billion agricultural deal with Japan, South Korea, and Indonesia. Fresh potatoes from Pei found new homes in Indonesia, with over $8 million in exports. Thailand stepped in as Canada's largest non-US potato buyer, and even Caribbean nations like Trinidad and Panama bought over $13 million worth of Canadian potatoes. No threats, no press briefings, just diversification. At home, Canada made sure the surplus didn't go to waste. They stabilized retail prices, funneled excess potatoes into food banks and community kitchens, and protected the grocery shelves from the chaos playing out just across the border. Meanwhile, US importers faced rising costs. A single 25-ton shipment of frozen Canadian fries that once cost $32,000 now came with $11,200 in extra tariffs. All because of a 35% tax passed with no warning, no negotiation, and no plan for the consequences. Fast food chains began to feel the burn. Mom-and-pop diners couldn't absorb the cost and started disappearing. And according to the USDA, potato product satisfaction across northern states dropped by 18%. The reason? Uneven frying, shorter shelf life, and declining quality. But here's the twist. Canada didn't fight back. They outgrew the fight. While Washington swung the tariff hammer, Canada built relationships. They scaled local supply. They expanded global markets. They turned punishment into opportunity. Still, it hasn't been easy. Shipping potatoes to Asia costs up to 35% more than trucking them to Buffalo. South Korea, despite a trade agreement, still hasn't approved fresh Canadian potatoes due to quarantine rules. And smaller Canadian farms without corporate contracts are still waiting for their breakthrough. Because diversifying is smart, but it's also hard. Especially when you're a small grower waiting on a ship that only sails once a month. By July 2025, Canadian potato exports to the US had dropped by 41.7%. US potato imports overall fell by 19%. There was no declaration of a trade war. No boycotts. No speeches. Just tariffs and retreat. This wasn't a fight. It was a quiet breakup. Because trust doesn't always shatter loudly. Sometimes it fades quietly in the dark. Between idle warehouses, closed diners, and fries that don't taste like they used to. Back in Canada, new markets are growing. Jobs are being created. One processing plant in Charlottetown signed a deal with a Japanese distributor and added a new production line. That created 45 full-time jobs and gave second-grade potatoes a new lease on life. The message is clear. When your biggest customer taxes your product like it's poison, you don't beg. You diversify. You adapt. You move on. And that's exactly what Canada is doing. This was never just about potatoes. It was about trust. And when trust gets taxed, it doesn't come back quickly, if ever. So here's the real question. Will Canada ever return to the table? Or was this the quietest breakup in North American trade history? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And hit subscribe, because the next time someone taxes trust and calls it strategy, you'll want to be here to see how that turns out. But what happens after the breakup? The ripple effect begins. By August 2025, ripple effects were being felt far beyond the potato fields of Prince Edward Island. In North Dakota, frozen food distributors scrambled to reconfigure supply chains. We relied on those Canadian shipments for years, one distributor said. Now we're patching holes with lower quality imports from Europe and the Midwest. It's a mess. US schools, prisons, and hospitals, institutions that depended on bulk Canadian produce, saw food service contracts rise by 18%. Taxpayers footed the bill, quietly. Meanwhile, in Canada, innovation kicked in. Pay farmers banded together to launch Spudshift, a co-op focused on flash freezing premium potatoes for Asian markets. Within months, they had backing from major shipping firms and government subsidies. In Tokyo, Canadian fries popped up in high-end izakayas, branded as Maple Crisp Gold. Back in America, something changed too. For decades, the US had assumed Canada would always be the fallback. The safe bet, the quiet neighbor. But now, that neighbor was moving on, making new friends, setting new prices, and learning to live without the US market. And quietly, US growers got nervous. If Canada could shift away from potatoes, what was next? Maple syrup, wheat, beef. What if the next crop to walk away wasn't even grown in Canada, but sold in America? This wasn't just about fries anymore. It was about trust, and whether it could ever be rebuilt. A new era of trade realignment. By fall 2025, the Canadian government was deep in talks with Vietnam, Singapore, and the UAE for long-term agricultural partnerships. Domestically, the message was clear. Don't rely on one market. Ottawa launched the Agri-Resilience Fund, giving $250 million to diversify farm exports and insulate Canadian farmers from US volatility. In the US, lobbyists for the fast food industry begged Congress for relief. But Washington, locked in a tough re-election year, wasn't in the mood to admit the tariffs had backfired. So the silence continued, just cold fries, empty booths, and the bitter taste of policy failure. Final thoughts. The US-Canada trade relationship was once a symbol of stability, two nations, side by side, feeding each other's economies and tables. But tariffs broke that bond. Not with explosions, but with quiet exits, redirected shipments, and the long shadow of resentment. So what happens next? Will cooler heads rebuild the bridge? Or will North America's most stable trade line become a cautionary tale in economics textbooks? Only time, and perhaps your next batch of fries, will tell.